Hey California Rainbow, my name's Emily. I'm your Grandworthy Associate Advisor for 2016, and today I'm going to share with you my tips for how to write an awesome thought speech. So first things first, when you're writing your thought speech, my recommendation is that you be somewhere where you can be alone. So whether this is in your bedroom, or maybe you have an office at your home, or just somewhere where you're not going to have constant distractions, people walking in and out and messing up your train of thought, because it can be really distracting when you're trying to write. So my second piece of advice for you is to tell a story. From past experience, I've found that when you tell a story, it really engages your audience and helps them to connect with the story more. So an example I'm going to give you is from one of my personal favorite thought speeches that I've written during this grand year, and I talked about God's plan for your life and how his plan, even though you may not understand it, he has an awesome plan for your life. And so this idea actually came to me when I was taking my cousin home, and then I had to drive to Mrs. Orion's house before Southern Instructional. And when I was going to drop my cousin off, we just hit a ton of traffic, and my cousin, she's only 11, she was really complaining, and it really put me in a bad mood. But then when I was on my way back to Miss Orion's house, I saw a pretty bad car accident, and it really got me thinking that maybe God had me hit all of that traffic so that I wouldn't be involved in that collision. And so that is what I talked to my girls about next meeting, is just having faith in his plan. So when you use a story, it just makes your thought speech much more relatable, because maybe someone in your assembly has experienced something similar to that, and so it just helps them to be able to connect to your thought speech a little bit more. My third piece of advice for you is, if you're not a storyteller, or you're not someone who is able to relate what happens in your own life to something more motivational like that, then to find a quote. And you can find quotes pretty much anywhere: Pinterest, Google Images, Facebook has good ones, I'm sure there's Instagram accounts. You can find quotes anywhere. So just find a quote that you really like, or one that really speaks to you, and base your thought speech off of that. So say the quote, say who said it, and just kind of go from there. This one works especially good for installations, because a lot of times your installation theme is already a quote, so you can kind of just base your thought speech off of that. And just, you can talk about really what the quote means to you in your own personal life, or a time that that quote helped you get through something. Again, telling the story kind of works two ways. So yeah, to find a quote is my third piece of advice. So now that you have the idea for your thought speech, let's talk about how to actually write it. So for me, I find the hardest part about writing thought speeches is trying to get it down on paper. Like, I have all these ideas in my head, but I don't know how to write it. So my advice is to just kind of do a brain dump. So just whatever comes to mind, just write. And it doesn't have to sound good or even go together, flow together well. Just kind of get it all down. And then from there, you can kind of pick and choose which sentences you like, where you kind of want to go with your speech, and then try and write your final draft. So instead of just trying to go straight for your final draft, definitely do a first draft, brain dump, here's what's in my mind type thing, and I'm sure you'll come up with a great speech. When I was writing my reception speech, I think I changed it 4 times, so yeah. Fifthly, after you have your final draft and you think it sounds good, I would recommend giving it to someone close to you. So maybe your mom or your dad or your best friend, the girl who's currently worthy advisor in your assembly if you're writing an installation speech, or even your mother advisor. Just someone you trust to read it and give you good feedback. For me, I always send my speeches to Mrs. Hopper, and she sends it back, and she always has some idea that can make my speech better, and it always ends up turning out really well, because I have that extra person who can just be like, hey, this kind of sounds weird, or hey, maybe this could make it better. So that's always a really good resource that I recommend always using. And lastly, my advice is to just memorize your speech. I can't tell you how much better your speeches sound when they're fully memorized and you can just recite them from the top of your head. And so I have some tips for memorization. For me, I like to memorize in chunks. So I divide it into maybe 3 parts, and then I read it over 7 times because I read it online somewhere that that's the amount of time it takes to memorize something. I don't know if that's true, but it works for me. So you read it 7 times and then try to recite it from memory. And then most of the time you'll know it by memory. And if you just keep repeating that or keep repeating it by memory, you'll eventually learn it. And then you just take it chunk by chunk and add a little bit more each time. And yeah, you have an awesomely memorized thought speech. Okay, how to write a great speech, lightning round tips. Pick one main point. So don't try to shove 10 points into one speech. It's just not going to work. Pick one point, have a purpose, and continue with that one point the entire speech. 2, know where you're going. So this kind of goes in with there. Don't know from the very beginning where you want to end. So don't start with one thing and then totally change to another thing. It's not gonna make a great speech. Tip 3, write like you talk. So don't try to use big fancy words or long grandiose sentences. Write just how you would talk. So if you were just telling this story or this thought speech to your best friend during 3rd period biology, then that's how you should write it for your assembly. It's going to sound way more fluid and you're going to sound way better when your final speech comes out. Keep it short. 1 page, double space, is a 2-minute long speech. That is the perfect length for a thought speech. It's short, to the point, but is also memorable. And lastly, end strong. Don't start strong and end weak, because the ending is what your audience is ultimately going to remember. So you want to make that the most memorable part of your speech. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed my tips, and if you have any questions or would like me to read your thought speech, I would absolutely love to do that for you. So happy writing, California Rainbow!